Ladies and gentlemen, it has been a long time and I've kept you waiting, but I'm back and I couldn't have a better guest to join me here on this edition of the Bird Calls. My brother, my friend, my colleague, the one and only Chris Connor from Boot Crew Media. And we got a really good episode today. We're going to talk about Zion Williamson, and we'll get into that in a moment. But first, like Chris, has been so long since we've done this.
Yeah.
And my comeback, I wanted to have this conversation with you because you're one of my favorite people in general. But when we talk about the Pelicans, I love the way we engage on this. And I've been watching you guys over at Boot Crew, and look, I understand y'all is the NWA of Pelicans media. You know what I'm saying? Like, and in that group, I view you as the MC Ren. And I'm explaining this to you real quick. You are the MC Rent. I say Chaz is the Easy E, the nihilist, just nihilistic. Chaz will burn it all down,
Yep.
But and I would say that Five, in my opinion, is the Ice Cube. You know that the lyrics is gonna be dope. They're gonna come at you in a certain way, and there's an edge to it. But it's you know how Cube is coming. And I
Mhm.
would say Leto, and people are gonna read this who only saw the movie, not gonna get this. But I would say Leto is the yeller in the sense that Leto is chill. You know what I'm saying? Like even his anger is chill. Is it's a very it's and you are the MC Ren because there's a force to it. There's a directness to it, and I think Ren is also was the underrated dude. He's my favorite member of the group, if you ask me. And I always just view you that way. So I'm glad to have you back. I'm glad to have this conversation with you. And how you doing today, my man?
Appreciate that, man. Like, yo, I never thought I'd be compared to a West Coast legend, so that's fire, man. I'm gonna have to break that down a little bit more, bro. But yeah, man, it's I mean, look, the last show we did, I believe, was right around preseason. Before the season started and everything. And unfortunately, it seems like a lot of things that we talked about came to fruition, a lot of the worries. Um, so yeah, man, but always good to be here, man. I mean, anytime you reach out, you want to connect, man. Most of the time, bro, like, I don't even look at it as pie and just doing a show, man. We just
Right.
talking, man. We just kicking it. So there's nothing to be here, man. Anytime, dog.
Right. It's just it's been like you said, it's been a wild season. And here we are with the Pelicans on pace for about 21 wins this season, which would be the second worst record in the history of the franchise. 21-61 would be pretty bad. And likely Pelicans headed for a top three draft pick this season. But at this stage of the year, with about 24 games to go, we're looking at really um an extended training camp, if you will. We are already in the mode of thinking about next year. And before we get into Zion, let's talk about the here and now. There was something that y'all were talking about the other night on the broadcast, and I kind of had a thought about it. And I said, and people talk about the tanking or the not to tank and these things. And I said that Willie Green and David Griffin have two different agendas. And I think people need to understand that doesn't necessarily mean that they are at odds. What it means to me is, and I want to get your thoughts on this, is Willie Green is the head coach. His job is always going to be. I have to think about what's going on today. What's going on today? We playing this game today. How do I do the best for this team in this game today? Because he is not promised tomorrow. Willie Green's job is not secure from day to day as a head coach. You can be fired at any time you are hired, as they say, to be fired. He is also, if, as we think, that his job is in jeopardy, he's also auditioning for 29 other teams as one day they may have to consider him or may want to consider him for a head coaching job again. So he has to play his role throughout the rest of this season, no matter what the conditions are. So I think that part, and David Griffin is looking at the long term in his mind. What am I doing? Where is my career going? Where is this team going? And he has to pitch long term because he wants to be around for the long term. That is the only thing he can control. He can't control day to day. The day to day is on the floor. He has no control over that. He is always, the task of any leader is to sell the vision, the long term vision. So those things are at odds, but that doesn't mean the two men are at odds.
Yeah, it's like it's like the people that are in the trenches, and it's the person that's maybe kind of overseeing the entire operation. It's just not only is it two different jobs, it's two different perspectives. So and I'm happy that you mentioned that. I remember we brought that comment up during that show, and to be honest, man, a lot of these things kind of they blend in together, specifically with a losing season. So you need that separation and that perspective of when the question, whether Justin is asking it or the fans are asking it, why are we winning? Why are we winning games? Why are we winning games? Well, because the coach, the commander, right, that's there, he has to win games. He can't come out and say, all right, guys, we're going to go out and play hard for 2 quarters, 3.5 quarters, and then we're going to lose. He may be thinking about it in the back of his head, but he knows his job isn't promised. Him rewarding the Pelicans with a number 1 overall pick isn't a badge of honor. That's not going on the highlight sheet of his coaching resume. So he has to find a way to continue to build relationships, get the best out of players, maybe help focus on new players and get the best out of them and put together a win. Like, the circumstances are what they are. He had some things that didn't necessarily go well for him that was out of his control, out of his hands, right? But even with everything that we're seeing right now, yeah, man, it's two different motives. And sometimes it's weird, but you see this in any business, as well. It becomes this weird conflict of interest thing. It's funny. I work in internet sales. I manage a group of dealerships, all of like the internet and phone calls that come in, and so on and so forth. So I'm separate from the people that are on the floor selling cars. And it's funny, like we work together, right? But what our goals are different. My goal is to help facilitate and get people in the door. That's my job. My job is to coordinate. My job is to organize. The people that are on the floor, they want to sell. They don't care what it looks like. 9 times out of 10, they may not care how many. They want to get as many dollars. They want to, excuse my language, fuck over as many people as possible. We coming from two different worlds, but we work for the same place. So it's almost like, yeah, we're working together, but we're not. And when you mentioned that, the other day, I mean, a light bulb went off in my head, at least, because, Griff has to evaluate a bunch of things right now, including Willie. Willie's just evaluating the people that are on the floor right now, and his job isn't to worry about what's happening next year, because he isn't promised to see next year or the year down the line. His job isn't to worry about returning players. His job isn't to worry about lineup deficiencies or roster issues or any of that. It's, what do I have? What are my cards? How am I going to play them? How do I play the best of them? It might piss off a lot of people, Grubb, but if he won 10 games in a row right now, knowing it does nothing for this team's future, it would make him feel good. It would satisfy him. It would look good on film for him to see, for others, as you mentioned, auditioning down the line, something else I didn't think about. So it's just a really good perspective. And when you kind of, you zoom out, that's really what we're looking at right now.
I mean, he's got to have guys who, this organization has had an issue with people wanting to come to work. You know what I'm saying? So if the environment all of a sudden is such that guys don't want to come to work, and you are trying to rebuild the reputation of this team, and you're Willie Green, you're trying to instill, let's say if you are planning on being here next year, you're still trying you cannot lose your way into a winning mindset. You can lose games while still trying to be a winner. You know what I'm saying? Like but you cannot tell guys and give them the understanding that losing in and of itself is okay. So every day Willie Green's got to show up to work with a lot of young guys on this roster. And he's got to go about the business of being a professional. So that is part of it too. It's like, and guys are going to fall into wins. I think that, and you have to realize too, other teams have their motivations. I firmly believe that in those 2 Spurs games, the Spurs were soft tanking. The lineups that they're putting out there on the floor, the way that they were using, the minutes that they were using, it's a little bit of soft tank, because for them, The Spurs' motivation changed the day Victor Wembanyama went down. It's no longer we need to get Vic into the playoffs. He needs a taste. It's now, can we position ourselves and add to Vic and De'Aaron Fox and give them more? Chris is not going to be here next year. Can we get better? So everybody else's motivations are different too. You don't have the luxury of a Utah does to do it in anonymity. You still
Yeah.
have the guy that we're about to talk about, Zion Williamson, former number 1 overall pick, and you have the eyes of the league paying attention to what you do in New Orleans. The Jazz are stable. They ain't going nowhere. You know what I'm saying? They've been there for 40 years. They ain't going nowhere. 50 years. They ain't going nowhere. The Pelicans are always in speculation. So there are public relations battles that are going on. There's branding, marketing, all these things come together to create what you have on this court. And no person will have a greater impact on all these things than Zion Williamson. So as we know, drafted number 1 6 years ago. And now we have reached this place post the Brandon Ingram trade where there's been a clear shift in the organization. You jettisoned one of your 2 superstars, so to speak, even though neither could, by the real definition of superstar, could really say that they are. But you've jettisoned one of your 2 franchise cornerstones. And you're at this decision now of, after year 6, is Zion Williamson the type of player that you can build around? And I want to show folks something real quick. I wrote an article for thebirdrights.com, and you can check it out. But it's about Zion Williamson and other number 1 draft picks. But let's look at this graphic right here, Chris. So since 1990, and I didn't want to go past 1990 because the NBA was very different prior to 1990. Number 1 picks stayed with their teams predominantly through their entire careers. But since 1990, we were in a different NBA. And in that period, that's 35 years. In that period, just 8 number 1 overall picks have made it to the NBA Finals with the team that originally drafted them. Some would look at this list and say, where's LeBron James? You have to remember, LeBron James left the Cavaliers, came back as a free agent. So the Cavs were no longer the team that he'd started his career with. So you got Shaq in 92, Allen Iverson in 96, Tim Duncan in 97, Kenyon Martin in 2000, LeBron James in 03, Dwight Howard in 04, Kyrie Irving 2011, and DeAndre Ayton in 2018. Those are your 8 number 1 picks who made it to the finals. The other part of this is they all reached their first finals with the team by the end of year 5. All of them. By the end of year 5. We are reaching the end of year 6 with Zion Williamson. So, Chris, my question to you is, have the Pelicans jumped the shark, so to speak, with Zion Williamson and their relationship with him? Is it time, based on historical trends, for the Pelicans to seriously consider moving on past Zion Williamson at the end of this season?
I think, unfortunately, I just don't think that they're in that space where they can afford to. You mentioned a bunch of different things in regards to PR and public relations, right? And there's a perception that is carried with this basketball franchise in New Orleans, just about, it's where superstars stay for a cup of coffee. They sign that second deal, and eventually they ask out or they end up being out. Now, I think under a certain circle, if all things were even, and let's say Zion had been in a similar situation to maybe a Chris Paul or an Anthony Davis, you wouldn't have to be asking if the Pelicans if it would be time for them to be considering trading Zion. We will be talking about what we were talking about his second year, even around the time he was drafted. How long do the Pelicans have on the clock before he requests a trade anyway? The unique thing about this situation is that, it plays into even our first conversation about tanking. Well, when you have such a rare talent, such a game-breaking talent, a dominant talent, when he's able to play, that simply hasn't played enough games for a plethora of reasons, it makes everything difficult. Zion playing games may have made it easier to move, from a franchise perspective, moving Brandon earlier than they did, or maybe some of the other pieces around the roster may have been different. even maybe down to DeJounte Murray or CJ McCollum. Who knows? But when you're talking about this franchise that has lost, as I've gotten older, I've kind of taken Baron Davis out of the discussion. But the main ones that we would consider are Anthony Davis and Chris Paul. Chris Paul reasoning, maybe a little bit dealing the ownership. He was being cheap. What type of longevity he could have in New Orleans is one thing. Well, I also think he was ready for a chance, but that's neither here nor there. Anthony Davis, losing, and maybe a little lack of self-awareness, but ultimately resources. So with Zion, it's a little bit different because while the Pelicans aren't the Golden State Warriors, or they aren't this amazing franchise, they have upgraded a little bit in regards to their facilities and some of the things as just a basketball franchise. His situation, it's not like the others. He just simply hasn't been able to stay on the floor consistently, and there's always a question between just when it comes to him being a professional and all the things that are around it. So I think it's difficult to look at it and say, well, what should the Pelicans do? Because they don't even have an asset right now that would garner them the return that would be worth trading a talent like Zion, because we've only gotten glimpses of what he can look like, the best of him. Philadelphia, for all of the different amount of games that Joel Embiid has missed, we've seen peak Joel. We've gotten a chance to see what that looks like. We've gotten a chance to throw him in the MVP conversations, even if it's been a mixed bag of sorts. We've seen it. It's not the case with Zion. So, and when you're also New Orleans, and when you are dealing with the fact in which you've lost superstars before, and you're looking for some sort of consistency, you haven't been able to find it over your 20 plus years. You've only made the playoffs in consecutive years, I think twice, and you have this all-world talent. When it's time for him to go, while he's getting some of the blame, eventually the blame will all be put on you once he finally blossoms. You got to be stubborn, I think, at some point and see this through, from a return on investment, from a return on the talent that you're giving up, and just the fact that, man, 6 years in, the difference between a lot of the other guys, we got a chance to see those other guys, those other number one picks, kind of blossom some in a consistent manner a little bit earlier than Zion. It's been just inconsistency throughout the stretch. And now you finally have a roster that should probably have looked like the roster we're looking at now should have matched a roster that he was playing with in his earlier years, a stripped down version, to really put the onus on him. You didn't see it. I can't think of many situations like this to where you have a talent that hasn't played enough games, but is groundbreaking, is game breaking, and as unique of a skill that you are going to find. He's completely zagging from what the rest of the league is doing, and is still dominant, still efficient. His per 36 numbers are the best they've ever been in this small sample size. It's everything that you can want, but somehow you're in year 6, and you still have a lot of the same questions than you did to begin with. I can't think of many number one players or any guys like. I just can't. The history,
because I mean,
we like history, right? So typically it's easier where I can say, right, Zion's situation reminds me of such and such. I can think of this particular player. When you put up that list, none of those guys are like Zion. None of those situations are like Zion, and you can go further and further. You're not going to find one. So if you're the Pelicans, you can't trade it. You almost have to see it through and stick it out because it is so unique from top to bottom.
I mean, I think there are multiple reasons why you can't. I think you look at the current with Zion and you say just on the court value around the league. I mean, I saw an article today where people talking about what Giannis could get in a return because let's say if Giannis asks out this summer and says he wants to get out of Milwaukee, and they said the asking price is 4 number ones. Is that the price anymore? Because what Luka did, the Luka trade, screws it up for everybody. You know what I mean? The Lakers gave Dallas 2 picks? 2 picks? And it's not like
Mhm.
Anthony Davis. I'm not going to say Anthony Davis is trade filler, but Anthony Davis is 30 years old. You know what I'm saying? You got an all NBA player at the age of 30 and 2 picks for a 5-time first team all NBA player. That messes up the market for everybody
Everybody.
when you
Yep.
talk about an agent going to a team and saying, "Well, this is what we want for Zion," and you talk about this. He still has to play 19 games this year to get to 40 games for only the third time in those 6 seasons. So your asking price going around the league, you are sending Zion out into a depressed market.
Mhm.
So I don't think that the value is there. And I think for the Pelicans, the risk is inherently lower because of the things that you put into his extension that reduce the contractual risk, the financial burden, if he does not live up to certain obligations. And I will say, from being around Zion on a semi daily basis and covering the team, he is in the best shape that I've ever seen by far. So maybe he has gotten it. Maybe the change, and I know people that are rolling their eyes, and you can feel it across, whoever watches this, people rolling their eyes. Oh, we've always said at times, I've never seen him in this shape. There are still things he does not get. Yes. There's still the tardiness. There's still missing things. Not yes. But the man is in shape. And like you said, putting up the numbers, he's doing that. He seems engaged. So do you send out and engage Zion Williamson, something that you had not seen, somebody who's finally maybe starting to embrace being the leader, no longer being a kid? And I think that, growing up is a process for everybody. I don't know. There's no date stamped on your back when you're born that says this is when you're an adult. And we may
Yeah.
finally be getting to see that Zion. And I think the other parts too are historically, this franchise, even if we take Baron Davis out of it, you go to Chris Paul, it took the Pelicans 4 years from getting rid of Chris Paul to get back to the playoffs, just to
Yep.
get back to the playoffs. And that was by the skin of their teeth. Anthony Davis hitting the fadeaway shot, to get you into the playoffs. And then you traded AD, took you 4 years to get back to the playoffs. And you did that by the skin of your teeth as a 36-win team that had to get its way through the play-in. So your history of trading away these franchise altering players has not been good. So I think with the financial risk being minimized, Zion's not making an exorbitant. He's not making 50 or 60 million dollars here. I think with that being the case, with what the way the league looks like, the fact that you are about to get a very high draft pick, which you could, and we'll talk about that in a second, the options that you have with that, you are closer in some ways than you have ever been to building the team that you have never built for Zion Williamson. I think the biggest problem, and I said this to David Griffin when we talked after the Brandon Ingram trade, the thing I said to Griff was, it seems like you were building 2 teams all along, a team for Zion and a team for Brandon. Now you are
Yep.
forced. You have no choice. You got to build this team for Zion. And those are 2 very different styles of play. The team for Zion is a team that is athletic, that wants to run and get up on the floor, does not want to sit in the half court. That wasn't the style that worked best for Brandon, as we've seen. The argument of speeding him up, that Brandon going to play at Brandon's pace, good, bad, or indifferent. But Zion has to play a certain way, and you're starting to see maybe it's not the right players. We could talk about the Kelly Olynyk's and the Bruce Browns and Eve Misi and all those things, and we will. But you are seeing the things that we've asked as fans and observers, as media, of building a roster around Zion Williamson. The realization that he is not a 4, and allowing
Yep.
him to move into that space as a wing player, just an oversized wing. That is starting to happen. The Pelicans are realizing that, understanding finally that even though Kelly Olynyk is not an all-star, he is a big who does operate in a space that is not in the low post. He can see the defense and do some things that you did not have. Do you want to upgrade it? I certainly would. But for the time being, you are seeing the possibilities. I think with
Yep.
that part, if Griff is going to commit, if David Griffin is going to be the general manager, I mean the president of basketball operations, executive vice president of whatever the title is, if he's going to be in that role, You've got to fully commit to building a team that works with Zion Williamson. And I think we're starting to see that.
Yeah, and part of that is, I forgot who made the quote famous, but I was reading something not too long ago in which the quote was like certain players give you an identity. Like you don't have to find one when it comes to certain players. Certain players, some superstars, some not. They come with their own identity. That's kind of just given to you when you draft them, right? When you bring them in as they develop. That's taken care of for you already. So it makes everyone's job a little bit easier. Some have to adjust, but it can make the type of coach you bring in, it can make the job of the people that are building a team a lot easier because this player says, this is my style. These are the things in basketball that fits best around them. And like you said, ironically, one of the issues over the past, in the Zion era is that the Pelicans lacked an identity. They were trying to be too many different things at once. They were trying to be, this hybrid of sorts, this team that could transform into anything at one period of time with all these contrasting talents that didn't necessarily fit. And even if it won you games, it wasn't something that was going to take over the league. It wasn't something that was going to make you elite because you did not have an identity. You didn't know what it was, whether it was from availability or whether it was just from how you put together the roster. And, the guys, look at all these teams. These great teams that win championships or even have good regular season success, they know who they're looking to when it's all said and done. They know this is our guy. The Pelicans didn't have that. Is it Brandon? Is it Zion? Is it him? Okay, well, maybe I'm the guy tonight. Maybe it just doesn't work long term. You're bringing in DeJounte Murray. You're talking about him being a leader when he should just be a fitting piece. He should be a secondary piece. He shouldn't have to be worrying about those kind of things. When your best player, your best two players who have been here for a certain period of time, that onus, that responsibility should be on them. So, that element goes into it as well, Grubb, that one of the reasons that we're talking about 6 years later is because you waited so long to take that risk and chance because you were scared on what it looked like. You were scared from what you saw behind the scenes with Zion and some of the things that had happened. You were scared of what it looked like to putting everything on his shoulders. When at this point, like, did it really matter? You did not have to reinvent the wheel. If it failed again, it failed again. It was going to be out of your hands. So now you may have wasted some time, but you are here right now. When you mentioned earlier about Zion, people rolling their eyes about the shape that Zion's in right now. And it's not just to me, Grubb, the fact that he's in the best shape of his career when we're talking about, professionalism and his dedication to the craft that I think is sticking out to me. It's the fact that when he got hurt, when he came back from the hamstring, he came back mid-season on a losing team in the best recovery shape that I would say I've seen him come back from. In fact, we're not used to him coming back from injuries that happen in season, not to where we're talking about multiple months that he misses. We're typically used to, if Zion goes out with an injury that is supposed to have him miss over a couple of weeks, we've seen setbacks. We've seen, return to play. Like, I don't think since his rookie year have we seen him have an injury of that magnitude, which he came back. And even then, he had some things he had to work through in regards to playing himself into shape. When Zion came back against the Minnesota Timberwolves at the end of January or whenever it was, he was looking like the guy that ended last season physically. He was ready to play 30 plus minutes if they needed him to. That hasn't happened. So that shows that mentally he was in a different place. Physically, of course he was. But it wasn't like he was playing, he was coming back. Maybe at that time it was thought maybe we can get some things going and maybe, sneak in and, for a play-in seed. But it wasn't. The team was terrible. So if you are willing at that point to invest the most that we've seen you in regards to, and I'm sure I know he missed some things along the rehab path, but on the Zion meter, this was as best as it's gotten in regards to buy-in on a recovery path. for you to invest in a team that's going nowhere is saying that finally maybe Zion has kind of eliminated all the other factors that it comes with being who he is. It's not about the perception, ain't about this Jordan deal, ain't about what's happening and being said online, ain't about anything else. It's barely about my teammates and what's around me, my coach. It's about me. I have to take ownership and responsibility of this. If I don't do this for anything else, I'm doing this for me. I go work out. I'm not working out for people to applaud. I'm not coming back in shape for people to say, man, you look good. I've seen that before. I'm doing this because I want to do it. It's what's best for my career and focus. When he could have he could have fallen into the similar traps and similar issues that have plagued him of, man, things just aren't going right for me. Things just aren't working the way I think that they should. I just can't catch a break. That shows a different level of maturity, and that's someone that you invest in. Now, is it later than you maybe should have wanted to? Yeah, but you're the New Orleans Pelicans. Look, you can't be a chooser at this point. If this is how soon that the Zion Renaissance has arrived, we get a chance maybe to see 5 great years of him and something like that, then you take it, you build around whatever that looks like, and hope that that's going to get you somewhere rather than in a depressed market, as you said, trading him for pieces and parts and going back to what exactly?
Knowing that you will not have a difference-making type player. Again, this is a league where you better have, if you want to advance to the playoffs, you have to have a guy who can be the best player for more than one series. And Zion is still the only player you have on this roster that you know for certain can be the best player on the floor for multiple series. Trey Murphy, as much as we like him, as much as we are excited about his future, has not proven that yet. And I don't think he's at this stage you want to take that risk. I don't think Trey would say, yeah, make me the guy. I think Trey thinks he can be an all-star. I think Trey, he said it. I think Trey believes he can be an all-NBA player. But I don't think you're going to build around Trey today. And if we're going to use the Joel Embiid comparison, and I think that is a good comparison in some ways, Joel Embiid is in year what, and he has never been in shape. Like, you're not going to lie to me and tell me that Joel Embiid has figured out how to stay in shape in his career. And though the highs have been higher, certainly with Joel Embiid as far as his individual play, the 76ers have never gotten past the second round, and yet they continue to invest in him and try to build around him because he is their identity. He is the guy who can be, and we know he can, with the best player in multiple series. His body has broken down. We could discuss, we're not going to discuss the reason why, but we could. But Joel, he's in, like you said earlier, he's an MVP caliber talent. He's got an MVP in the pocket. He's an all NBA caliber player night in and night out. Zion is that talent-wise. He is that production-wise, like he is right now. If he did this, what he's done over these 20-plus games, over 80 games, he's a first-team All-NBA performer or second team at the worst. So, yeah, you don't find those players. They don't grow on trees. You cannot give them away and expect you're going to get one right back, even in a draft where you've got another top 3 or 4 pick coming up. So I think, you have to try to figure this out. And like you said, if you're the New Orleans Pelicans in particular, your market, your history, where your position is in the Western Conference, which is only going to get more competitive next year because the Jazz will be right there with another high pick. The Spurs will get 2 first-round picks potentially this season that are very good. Other teams will get healthier as well. So even the ones that drop back in the West doesn't mean that 1 through 15 it's going to be any softer in the schedule. So giving away high-level talent to me doesn't make sense, and that's what you would be doing with Zion. You would have to be paying people in some regard for the risk to take him off your hands, and I don't think you get an equitable deal in that. It's time to figure out what you're going to do with Zion.
Yeah, I mean, and you have to let the past be the past at this point. You can't get into the mistakes were made across the board, and a lot of people are to blame. It's not just on Zion. Even if I'm pro individual when it comes to accountability. In this particular situation, I would give Zion a good majority of the blame. But I'm sure there were definitely some mistakes multiple mistakes that David Griffin made. There've been mistakes that Willie Green has made. But now, going forward, and it's so interesting, to watch. I guess the fan base. You When AD and Chris Paul got traded, while they were all stars, and I think when Chris Paul got traded, he was maybe a top 5, top 7 NBA player at the time. When AD got traded, maybe probably a top 10 player, top 5 talent, but neither of those guys were generational. We haven't seen a talent like Zion, and that's the other thing that's so polarizing about this entire situation is that this isn't like trading a Jimmy Butler. This isn't like trading a Karl Anthony Towns from Minnesota. This isn't like moving on from even the guys that I just named. Zion is one of one. If you try to go in a factory and recreate Zion, you lose every time. He has one leg is longer than the other one. He walks, he walks weird. It's like he has this Ferrari engine, but he's built like a pickup truck or an SUV. He makes 280 pounds look. I mean, I've seen him weigh 280 pounds multiple times, and I could argue that maybe it's closer to 300. I could argue sometimes it's closer to 260. You wouldn't know. It's a dude in a league where you would think his strengths would create problems for him. You would think with a league that has transitioned so much to about shooting the basketball and spacing the floor would matter. And you would think on top of that, with the amount of tension that all things considered, he still receives, something will slow him down, and somehow he still finds a way to persevere. His game hasn't improved or changed much since his rookie year, Grubb. A lot of it is still the same. That tells you, even with the injuries, it does not matter. It does not matter. That is generational. That is something that you can't create. You can't teach. You can't put into a basketball camp and say, hey, we're gonna do the Zion drill right now. It's not a fucking thing. It's not gonna. There is no drill to splitting a double team and having 5 players look at you and the entire paint collapse and somehow you still dunk the basketball from the free throw line. It doesn't exist. And I think that's what's so interesting, about this and this entire thing. And I think that's what I would hope most people hold on to. It's frustrating. He may be a volatile asset. He may be someone that still needs to mature. He may not have been ready for everything that he received, or that he thought he was. He may not be someone that's on the floor. But when you compare him to a Brandon Ingram, when you compare him to some of the other talents, or even now, the new thing is going to be Trey Murphy, like you mentioned. That's going to be the new thing. Every time Zion pisses someone off, people are going to say, well, maybe, let Trey take. No, you can't. The game is rigged, man. The game, it's unfair.
It is what it is.
It is what it is. It always has been. The most talented, the unique talents, the people that have God-given abilities, they get longer leashes, man. They get longer opportunities and longer stays to do shit that isn't fair for everyone else. Zion, the Zion rules aren't the same for Trey. I know we hate it, but we all worked in places in which it's like that. The ultra talented guy, that's just him. You got to allow him to do him. It is what it is. But that's what people, I hope, realize. These guys are not equal to Zion, and hopefully, we're watching a dude that's finally learning what that means for him and what that means in getting the best overall out of him. Not for anybody else. Fuck that. For Zion. We want Zion to be happy. That's it.
Chris, I'll say this before we move to the next part of this. There's another guy from Philadelphia who was on that list, who I think, and I've compared, I know I have his style of play too, and it's Allen Iverson. And look, if you ask people in Philly, at the end of the day, when Joel Embiid's career is done versus Allen Iverson, who's going to be more beloved in Philly?
Yeah.
Allen Iverson, right? Then people love Allen Iverson. Allen Iverson missed practice. Everybody said, Allen Iverson missed workouts. Allen Iverson was out doing this. And this is not to excuse. Again, we are not excusing the things that Zion has done. But what the Sixers did at that time, and what started with Pat Croce, who was the man in charge, and you had a coach in Larry Brown who ideologically, the conflict was there, but understood ultimately the greatness of Allen Iverson and that his job was to harness that. That the ownership told Larry Brown, Allen ain't going nowhere. As long as the ownership was on that, the Allen is not going anywhere. You were going to figure out how to coach Allen, and we're going to give you players that complement Allen. They are not players that by themselves. Nobody's checking for Eric Snow. Nobody's checking for Aaron McKee. Nobody's looking for those Tyrone Hill. No, on any other team, those are just guys, right? On any other team, those are just guys. They're fine NBA players at what they did, but on any other team, nobody's saying we're going to make Aaron McKee a number one guy. He's going to be our two guard that's going to give us 25 a night. You're not saying that about Tyrone Hill. You know what I'm saying? Like they're role players in the NBA. But the goal was we facilitate what Allen needs. We complement what he can't do. Because Allen Iverson, you can make the very strong argument that his game was the exact same on day one when he walked in the NBA as it was the day he played his last game in Memphis. Right? Allen was never a efficient, as the numbers would say, scorer.
Yep.
But on the floor, he changes the game. When he's on the floor, you have to account for Allen Iverson. You have to do whatever he's going to do, he's going to disrupt things. And you've got to account for him. That's Zion Williamson. And Allen Iverson, too, physically unique, a two guard and a point guard's body who should not have been able to do the things he did in the paint, scoring around the rim, taking contact, finishing all those things. A unique talent that you cannot duplicate. There are other undersized guards, but nobody was, when you see old players talk about it, nobody, when you had to play AI, you were up the night before because you knew for 40 minutes, Allen's coming at you, he's coming at you, he's coming at you. That's what you want from Zion Williamson, to be that. And I'm not saying they're the same. Anybody wants to argue that Allen Iverson is more competitive and all, I won't argue that. They're not the same mentally, but I'm talking talent-wise and what an organizational commitment is to your guy. That's a more realistic blueprint in my mind for Zion Williamson's career going forward than there is for any other pick that you would compare it to. I can't compare him to Shaq. Like you said, I can't compare him to Tim Duncan. You don't have those types of things around him. But what you've got is, I've got this guy. And you do have the luxury now of a Trey Murphy. Trey Murphy is a luxury for you. This upcoming pick is a luxury for you. You have talent on this roster. And so let's talk about that a little bit. We talk about the talent on this roster. If you're going to build around Zion, let's start with the pick, because I think the pick is more important than anything else. Before you get into free agency and anything else, it's where that pick falls. If you're the Pelicans, you get number one or number two. There's no way you're moving that. You know what I'm saying? Like, you are locked in. You're taking either Cooper Flagg or you're taking probably Dylan Harper at 2.
Yep.
And you're good. You're happy. You're integrating either one of those into your thing, and they do things that complement Zion. If it's Cooper Flagg, he's a guy who can facilitate, can play on the perimeter, defends, loves to defend, is a rugged rebounder, could be at his peak. Cooper Flagg, and I think people overestimate his scoring ability at the NBA level, because I don't think of him as a guy who's going to be a volume scorer, but I think of him as a guy who's going to be a like, let's say first year, let's say 17, 7, and 4. His first year for a rookie, coming in trying to figure out maybe better. But I mean, I'm talking about if you're playing with Zion and Trey as the third guy and that trying to figure things out. If you're getting that every night, and the highs, that's average, but your great nights are the 2010 nights, 2010 and 5, 2010 and 7, and Cooper Flagg's giving you that at a couple of stocks, a steal or two, a block or two on there, then you've got a good front line here. You're working with something that's pretty decent. You figure out your center position. Dylan Harper comes in and with DeJounte Murray likely gone till the later stages, if at all, next season with his Achilles, with Herb Jones likely gone until maybe look, that rotator cuff, that's 4 to 6 months.
Yeah.
And you talk about no shots in the summer for Herb Jones, because that's his right shoulder. That's no shots getting up for Herb Jones this summer. That's no getting bigger for Herb Jones, because there's no late weights being lifted with that rotator cuff while it heals up. So Herb Jones is going to come back and be small when he comes back, whenever that is, if it's late fall, early winter, maybe even January. You're talking about when Herb gets back on the floor. So Dylan Harper can step in and be a 1 or a 2 for you and give you solid minutes. If you get that pick, how important is it for the Pelicans to really lean into that player and integrate them and make them a true running mate and build your new big three with Trey and Zion?
I think it's really important, Grubb, specifically if it is 1 or 2, because it gives you a different version of what you had kind of been looking for as an organization. Over, let's say post first year of Zion, or let's say second year of Zion, you've been looking for an insurance. That's what they've been looking for. They've been looking for good insurance. And I think if you end up with a Dylan Harper, you end up with the Cooper Flag, that some folks are, some franchises, depending on where they go, are going to be looking at them as the guy, the number one guy, a franchise changer of sorts, a pillar. Well, if you're able to get him in a different situation where he's walking in knowing he's not number one, knowing he doesn't have to be number 2 right away. Hell, if given the situation with DeJounte Murray and Herb Jones, I'm expecting CJ McCollum to be playing basketball in New Orleans at least for another training camp. So you may not even have to be a number 3 option. It's perfect, right? But you don't have that pressure on you to develop that most guys in their situation would want. But at least, I remember when Zion got to New Orleans, I thought that was going to be one of the blessings. But the problem with that was that he was already the best player on the team. We just didn't know it yet. He was already the most dominant player on the team. We did not know it. Or maybe some did. We just had to see it yet. But that's what it was. So what do you built this team. Pelicans made a similar mistake with Anthony Davis year 2 by getting all of these guys to take the basketball out of his hand because you want insurance just in case his game doesn't grow offensively. And right away, second year, he becomes a 20 point per game scorer. Now what do? You got all these extra hands in the in the kitchen that you don't need now. Well, a rookie can come in knowing, but it's a hierarchy right away because Zion is the most dominant. Zion is the best player. Now there is no one else in the pecking order. You mentioned Trey. Trey is 100% gonna be fine in knowing, and it's smart. It's very, very smart. Comes from a very smart family. While he's confident in his game, he knows that they're going as far as Zion takes him. You know, this is Zion's team for sure, which is gonna make his life a lot easier. It just is, man. So you bring in a Cooper Flag, you bring in a Dylan Harper on one side, they get to walk in and just go out there and hoop, play basketball. They get to play with some great talents, and they're in unique and typically situations that are reserved for later lottery teams or teams that are outside of the lottery in regards to talent. You get that element. And a lot of these guys have been playing together as well. It's not, this isn't Washington, for example, where, you got guys from all over the place. You went out, you go get Marcus Smart, you go get Chris Middleton, you have a bunch of rookies from they're all over the place in regards to direction. Well, the Pelicans finally now have a direction. So you have that in your favor. For the organization, if the Zion experience does fail again, if it does fail and you ultimately have to go into a situation where you have no choice to move on, whether he requests a trade or you decide it's finally time or he can't stay healthy, you have this player waiting in the wings that, look, if they're that guy, it's not going to matter. They're going to show you that they are that guy. Look at Amin Thompson in Houston. So many people ahead of him on his own team in regards to emphasis. He got a different look in his eye, Grubb. He has a different energy around him, a different level of responsibility. He's already talented. He's already intelligent student of the game. For like this dude, I was watching something the other day. Grubb, he named 20 straight MVP. Like, damn, I don't even know if I could do that if I had to. But like, great to see for someone of his age, right? But he just is who he is. You couldn't do no one in front of him. Once he got his opportunity this season, he was going to take over. Houston gonna have to make some changes now because you got guys in front of him, right? You got Sengun and you got Jalen Green, ultra talented guy. You got Jabari who you drafted. You got all these different dudes. But that's That dude's different. That dude is 100% different. So if Cooper, I think that's just instilled in you. That's just in you, waiting for the moment to unleash and show, right? So if you draft Cooper, like you draft Dylan Harper, there's nothing that you're gonna be able to do to stop. If they're that guy, they're gonna show it at some point. It's just a matter of time. So it gives the Pelicans that level of insurance that they've been wanting for, or you just, I mean, I would even say a soft reset. You could be putting yourself in a situation, in a better cross control situation with better hierarchy, and like you said, not only just better fitting, but maybe the best group of talent in the present and going for, even if it's top heavy, than you've had in a very long time. When it just goes to just, when you're just looking at, when you're talking about talent fit, you have the opportunity to do that and maybe speed up this process a lot faster than you would have in the average situation of a team that's going to be a number 2 or number 1 or a number 3 overall pick upcoming.
Because if the worst case scenario is if the pick does drop, let's say you end up with the 7th pick. Let's say, I mean, that's not supposed, but let's say the world turns or you end up with the bottom half of the lottery, however you end up with, whatever happens, and you say the star that I want isn't there. Well, now you've got a position to be able to trade for a veteran, use that pick to get that veteran player that you want, because I think there will be a lot of movement this offseason with veterans because of where salaries are and because of the disappointment in a number of teams. So now what are you looking for? And I think people have looked at guys like Devin Booker, and I know y'all mentioned Devin Booker a lot. I think a secondary target, it might be time to revisit the KD conversation. It might be time to revisit the KD conversation, because if KD is your 4, as your spacing 4, with Zion Williamson and Trey Murphy, it's a much different situation now. And you take him on a short-term deal, it could be worth it to make that run. Because what you do have too, and I think this is what makes CJ McCollum, and people who want to get rid of CJ, I tell you, this is the mistake, is because CJ is going into that final year of his deal. And that expiring deal next year is worth so much more to the Pelicans now because of the injuries. Like that, you cannot do this without the Herb and DeJounte vacuum, because nobody's coming to get them right now till they see them on the court again.
Yep.
So those injuries increased CJ's contract value, and the fact that if you can still move him to the bench, and I think CJ, if he's cashing his check, he's good. Like the check is good. CJ's not going to be a problem, but his role is defined. You tell him you still going to get shots, man. The shots are still there, but it's your second unit. And you give him that, and then the last year of that deal, like you said, if things implode along the way and you decide you need to do a retooling, then CJ is still an expiring deal to give away to somebody else and to start bringing in some assets. You may have to take on, something else to get rid of CJ or whatever as that favor, but you could get those picks back that you've been looking to acquire, as somebody says we need shooting when they push for their NBA title next year. But CJ, his value now, and especially with this group and a team that you always are going to need, you don't need 10 shooters for Zion Williamson. This whole idea of having 4 shooters around Zion, this is the NBA. You ain't going to find those 4 shooters. The Boston Celtics are the exception to what you're doing, and they don't even care about the stats. You seen Joe Mazzulla, they asked him the other day, Jaylen Brown is shooting only 30-something%, 32% from the three-point line. He said, I didn't even know that till you told me, because his job is not to care about the numbers. The identity, which you talked about in the first part of this, of the Celtics, is we shoot threes. That's the Celtics idea. So if Jaylen is open, he's going to shoot threes. So if the Pelicans have guys who are committed to shooting, if Trey Murphy is giving you 9 3-point attempts a night, if CJ is giving you 7 3-point attempts a night, and the rest of if Jose Alvarado as your third point guard continues to shoot 40% from 3 and is giving you 5 to 6 3-point attempts off the bench every night, now it's a lot easier to make up. You don't have that 40 number. Was never the number. That's something that Willie Green, in my opinion, should have never put out there. It ain't the number. It's who's taking them, when are they taking them, and why are they taking them. And if Zion Williamson is on the floor, guys are getting good threes. That's just the simple fact of the matter. You're going to get good open threes if Zion Williamson is on the floor. And if you're taking good threes, you're making them. And if you're making them, and if you can defend and fix this defense, then those things happen. But that's about upgrading the talent around Zion and building the team that works with him. ultimately. So even if you don't get the number 1 or number 2 pick, there are options for you. It's not a disaster if the Pelicans end up with the 5th pick. It is not. It's not. The world doesn't crumble. You say, "Oh, they couldn't even do the tank right." There's no guarantees in this anyway. You wasn't supposed to have number 1 when you got Zion.
Yep,
You wasn't
yep.
supposed to be there. So beggars can't be choosers in this.
Yeah, and look, I think this period, man, it's what's going to be really interesting about where this Zion situation goes, and how his career progresses or ends or flourishes in New Orleans is the Pelicans have to commit to the idea and find out without a shadow of a doubt, is he a carrier? Is he a carrier? They have to sell out on the if Zion can carry a franchise on a basketball floor and win games. Because if he is, it makes everything easier. I don't think Zion being the second best player on your team works in New Orleans. I don't think it's something that they can afford to have to think about ever again. He's either the guy that's going to win games, the guy that's going to be one of the best 5 players in basketball, the best 7 players in basketball, or he isn't. If he isn't, it's a failure, because the dude that's built the way that he is with his gifts and his dominance, his gravity, his ability has to be one of those guys. And if he isn't, then it's no point of even trying it anymore. It's a waste for everybody. If he is a carrier, then Grubb, simply having a slightly refreshed roster, a couple ingredients here or there, it's going to automatically put the Pelicans back in playoff conversation, because those guys, they always do it. Luka will do it. Joel, when he was healthy and when he was right, you look up and down some of those rosters. They may not have been all of them weren't the most star-studded, but they fit around him. And in the meantime, certain guys that maybe were supposed to be role players, a guy like Maxey turns into a star along the way. Those are the genesis of that is having a dude like Joel, a Jokic. The list goes on and on. If you are one of those guys, one of those talents, you're a carrier, the floor of the team changes immediately. It rises immediately, even with some flaws. They're still going to have some flaws. The fact that Minnesota is in a situation that they're in right now, to where their team, it's not perfect, and it hasn't been perfect over the past couple of years necessarily. They're trying to figure out what that perfection is, and it's put some weird looking pieces and lineups together and so on and so forth. But guess what? They're still going to be a playoff team. Well, they're going to be a playoff team because Ant Edwards is that guy. He's that good on the basketball floor. You put Ant out there and you figure out the rest, and you continue to recycle these pieces. Same with Giannis. That's what was happening over the earlier stretches of Giannis, to where the Milwaukee, man, we used to talk about this with some of the old Bird Right shows all the time. Milwaukee reset so many times early on with so many different players as soon as they knew that they had Giannis, because they said he is different. He's one of the best, and we know he can carry. We just got to figure out the shit around him. We got our foundation. So that's what the Pelicans, I think, what they should have done earlier, but since they didn't, we're here now, which I'm hoping that they are completely in. This is no longer, we're a good group of guys. We have a culture. You're not the Miami Heat. You're not the Miami Heat, the Jimmy Butler, Bam team, Tyler Hero, like strength in numbers. You're not that team. Your DNA, for better or for worse, is Zion Williamson. And you have to sell out, even with the headaches, even with the frustration of, can this guy carry me to success and to winning games? Can Zion go out and win me? I ain't talking about this year. I've washed away this year completely. The competitiveness ain't the same. For these guys, they're not playing for anything. They're not playing to prove anything. These guys aren't playing. The main guys aren't playing for money, and most of these guys won't be on the roster next season to open up next year. I won't say most, but some of them won't. You got to figure out between this offseason and next year, even with DeJounte being out and Herb Jones, if Zion is the guy, you'll be able to get away with a lot of shit. But he has to be not only the guy, but a carrier. And if you can find that out and you can commit to it, that's going to answer most of your questions and most of the woes that you have by itself.
I mean, look, you could look to Golden State. and have a similar circumstance. And you say they had to decide at some point because they weren't sold on Steph Curry initially. You still had Monte Ellis.
Yep.
They had to figure these things out. Steph was going through his ankle problems, and everybody was thinking Steph could have been a potential bust in the early parts. And they made their choice, and they said, okay. And I know this will spark his conversation, but just by saying his name, but Mark Jackson essentially made the choice and
Yep.
said, I'm going with these two guys. Steph and Clay are my guys. This is what the team is. He didn't love Draymond yet, and that was the one thing that Mark Jackson didn't see. He wasn't in love with Draymond's game, but he's figured out the identity of this team is these two guys. But Steph is the lead of that. So everything needs to be built around Steph, whether y'all believe in it or not. And he got ownership on board. And like you said, you have to commit to the bit, whatever it is. Minnesota, as you just mentioned, their problem has been, who are you committing to? They thought it was Carl, and now it's supposed to be Ant, but have they fully committed to Ant in the way, as far as roster building, that it takes to make Ant successful? Oklahoma City, they committed to Shea. We're going to build this team around Shea.
Yep.
He's a defensive dynamo. He scores in the mid-range. What do we need for this dude? They built that team. You can say what the Grizzlies did. And Ja may be on the block. There are rumors about that. But that team is built to run up and down the floor with Ja Morant and do the things that he likes to do. The Celtics with Jason Tatum, who was the second overall pick, whatever, when they took Jason Tatum, third pick, in Boston, Jason Tatum, I would say, by himself is not a number one guy, even though he's been on All NBA first team multiple times. By himself, I don't think he's a guy who carries a team to a championship, but they committed to him and put the guys around him who could do the things that he could not. That's what you got to do. And you didn't do that with Zion for years 1 through 6. You're starting to see what that's coming to be. And I think the Pelicans do. I don't think it's unreasonable for somebody to say, I'm optimistic about the future. If you get the coach right, you make this commitment. There's still going to be some growing pains. No, you're not going to be a championship team next year, but you could reasonably see a path forward financially and on the court to make the moves necessary to build a championship contender 2 to 3 years from now.
100%. I mean, I love the part you brought up about Minnesota because, I part of the things that got them in trouble, they start even before Ant Edwards gets to Minnesota, right? It's just a domino effect. So before Cat, it was a mixture of you got Wiggins and you got Zach LaVine, and then Jimmy Butler ends up in the mix. Then he's gone. Then it's Ant and Cat, and now it's just Ant. And you trade Cat because now it's Ant, and you have to find a way. Even if it's frustrating for him in the moment, you have to find a way to build a whole new set now because you got a chance to look and see how great he is. But in the midst of all this, so much collateral damage from Rudy Gobert to, like the list goes on. There are players that maybe if you had the foresight, and sometimes you just got to gamble, unfortunately. But if you're able to see 5 steps ahead, maybe you can get some of this clutter out of the way. The Pelicans might be in a situation where it could be a blessing in disguise. It could 100% be because now their hand was forced due to their own stubbornness, due to them being and not just being stubborn, being arrogant of sorts. Well, now your hand was forced, but it's what the history of basketball tells you, Grubb. One thing about the history of this game, more times than not, it don't lie. It doesn't lie. Small guards don't win championships is number one. Isaiah Thomas is the outlier. Isaiah and Joe Dumars, that's it for the most part. You know what I'm saying? And we can look. Girl, I was watching something. I remember last year I hardly ever watch TV anymore, and I watched somebody say we're having a conversation. This is when the Jalen Brunson debate was going on. I turned it right off. Like I've seen this before. I said it didn't work. It didn't work for air. So the game of basketball, the history of basketball does not lie. It stays consistent. You get generational acts, teams, championship teams. You got people trying to copy and paste things that they can't do, teams that they can't be. Everyone wants to be Boston. They can't do it. Before that, everyone wanted to be Golden State. They couldn't do it. You can't replicate being Steph, Klay Thompson. It just doesn't fucking exist. There is no next Steph. And on top of that, getting a Draymond Green, that doesn't exist. There is no creating the Boston Celtics. You can't refurbish that. It's not the thing. So you know what you win by best doing, which we've learned in doing this, just walking life by being you, by leaning into what you are. Fuck everything else for copy and pasting here, trying to who are you? And the Pelicans have
Cavs.
Yes.
Look at the Cavs. Donovan Mitchell is not a guy by himself that could carry a team. We saw it in Utah. Nope. We saw it in Utah. He had talent in Utah. Couldn't carry that team past the second round. Mm-hmm. What did they do in Cleveland? They said we're going to overwhelm people with the amount of talent that we got around this dude.
Mm-hmm. And we're going to empower Evan Mobley. We are going to make him an essential piece. There are going to be points where Evan Mobley wins this team's important playoff games this summer. He's going to have to. I mean, he's the guy. Donovan Mitchell's a great basketball player, right? He can do amazing things, but Darius Garland, amazing, great basketball player. Evan Mobley is the one you can't teach. He's the one you can't create. He's the one you can't. If you got a 6'3" son, a 6'4" son, or someone who's about to be that, you got a chance of him being Donovan Mitchell. The odds are low, but you at least got a shot. You got to have a lot of shit go right to have an Evan Mobley on a bunch of different levels. They were able to see that, and therefore, here we are. I brought up Houston earlier because they're going to have to, shout out to Udoka. But it's the same kind of situation. But maybe they're adapting earlier by having Thompson, go from a dude that was playing rotational minutes, getting in where he could fit in, to taking game-winning shots against, on Jason Tatum against Boston earlier in the year. That just don't happen. That's not something that people are with. It's a lot of ego and a lot of money and a lot of politics involved in this shit. But one thing that never lies in basketball, that always repeats itself, it's the most beautiful part about this game is that with all the changes, all the different, the different iterations, all the fads that come in, things typically reset to whatever the laws of the game and history has told you more times than not. And for the Pelicans, they have a chance to live by the book of basketball here. We're not cluttering up the field for our star, for our guy. We're building around him. And we gonna live or die by what this is. We either are going to be a team that is great, and if we suck, hey, it was on his shoulders and it didn't work. There is no Pelicans wanted to live between. Well, we hope we can be a 50-win team, but see, we got this insurance to where we could be a 45. What does winning 45 games do for you in the long term? You'd rather bottom out. That's the real way of doing this. Not if things don't go as planned, we can be 45 wins. That happens by surprise. You know who did that once? The Houston Rockets, maybe 15 years ago when they were dealing with T-Mac and Yao Ming getting hurt. T-Mac ends up getting hurt. But a bunch of role players and a bunch of players that they had invested in around with Yao Ming as well ends up having them being a really good team. But it wasn't supposed to be that way. It just happened. Those things happen. But if you try to plan for it, it will blow up in your face every single time. They got a chance now to do this shit right. Do it by the law of the game. And let everything else take care of itself, bro.
Yep, I'm with you on that. Lean into what you do and be that. You cannot chase trends in an NBA. You just have to be unique. And like you said, just to be quick about it, the Celtics thing is everybody keeps talking about the threes. The thing about the Celtics is nobody in the NBA has 4 perimeter defenders. That's what they are. It's not the threes. The threes are just the offensive philosophy. The thing that the Celtics have that nobody else have is 4 dudes on the perimeter that can all harass the hell out of people. And then you got a giant 7'3" dude in the middle who can block shots and go shoot threes. That's unique. The Warriors were unique. Like you have to lean into the crazy stuff because that's what you have that no one else has. It is not, this is what the numbers say. It is never that. It is never that. Even when you look at the Kobe Bryant Lakers with power, They weren't leaning. There was no formula. You couldn't explain it. They had the best talent, and they had a dude who was obsessed with winning. So for the Pelicans, it's you got to lean into what you do that nobody else does, and that thing is Zion Williamson. The thing that you have that nobody else can replicate. Because every night you see it on the court. When that dude steps on the floor, other teams is like, I ain't got that. Before I let you go, I'm going to ask you two things, and these are fun questions. These are
Yep.
more fun. Because one is, there's been this talk about, the past in New Orleans at the winning. And Chris Paul came back, of course, and he always revisits, says, I love being in New Orleans. I love my history here. And y'all had a conversation about retired jerseys. But I just want to put this out and just make sure people understand. Chris Paul's how good this man was. Chris Paul's last season in New Orleans, they win 46 games. 46 games. Okay? You know who played the second most games on that team? Carl Landry. You know who played the third most games on that team? Willie Green. He took that team to 46 wins. You can't name like the other starters on that team. David West missed 20 games that year and didn't play in the playoffs, and the Pelicans, the Hornets got eliminated in the first round. People forget those things about how good Chris Paul was. The other part is Anthony Davis, who goes on another thing, and Anthony Davis be revisiting this stuff and making stuff up in my mind. The dude who still has never acknowledged New Orleans since he left, but goes out and says, I knew for sure that me and Boogie were going to win the championship in 2015, and that was not going to happen. Like, people forget that the Pelicans had to win 11 of 13 at the end of the year after they traded and changed the roster and all these things just to get to 6th in the West. They were lower than that when Boogie got hurt. The talent, the potential was there, but the results had not arrived yet. So when you think about, I just want to get your thoughts on the revisionist history of downplaying how good Chris Paul was in New Orleans and Anthony Davis continuing. It seems like every time either AD or Boogie talk about that team, they talk about how it was supposed to do this, but we were there.
The Grubb, that's such a
conflicts existed inside that locker room. We know it wasn't perfect as they want to try to tell that story now.
That's such a good point. So I'm gonna start with the Chris Paul thing. I think part of the Chris Paul situation is just the fact that, and Chaz made a good point about the fact that it just was so long ago. So I think people, and I think with Chris, he's played in so many different other places and has had other memorable moments that you can reach for in recent memory. I mean, we talking 07 when they were maybe a Gennaro Pargo shot away from making the conference finals. That's so long ago. We talk about almost 20 years now, right? Well, you can reach a little further back to the Clipper days. Most people can remember the situation with the Houston Rockets and being a hamstring injury away, maybe, from eliminating the KD Warriors. You can remember his 1 year with Oklahoma City and with SGA, and to where he almost started this thing of like, I'm just gonna go to places and build
shit
and leave.
The ultimate like, that's just razor.
Yeah. I'm just gonna go. I'm gonna fix up your house. I'm gonna need 10 million, but I'm gonna fix up your house and then I'm gonna leave and go to the next house. But don't worry about it. I don't need to be here long. I mean, I don't need no other commitments. I don't need to buy a house. I'm gonna help you build your house. In return, I need that 10 million. And because don't worry, I got the next place I'm going to next that I already got on my radar. Wonderful. So you got all these different, all these more recent things. I think with Chris Paul, it really makes people forget how important he was. And it's subjective when we talk about importance, but how great he was. Like I remember the conversation being, it was weird. He was a top 7 player, in my opinion, but there was a period in time to where it was like, who's better, him or Deron Williams at point guard? Who's the best point guard in basketball? And this is with Steve prime Steve Nash in this period of time winning MVPs. That's how good Chris Paul was. Chris Paul has done, he was on cover of 2K. Like Chris Paul was a superstar, but he also was a carrier and a floor raiser. And I think, the thing with CP, it may have been 6 years. And I think he had some revisionist history about part of the reasons he left. And so, ownership was fucking with him and so on and so forth. But I think he also saw that he had some influence of some of his friends, some of his counterparts, and his future Olympic mates going to other places, teaming up, and he knew he was in a place where that could never happen. 100% fair on a team
Done
that wouldn't
Tyson
compete.
dirty.
Yeah,
They
yeah,
done David
yeah,
West dirty.
yeah. Like I mean, I think that's also a part. But I'm
Yeah.
gonna let Chris slide. Regardless, he made history, and he was one of the best players in basketball. And forget Houston, forget Clippers. The best Chris Paul as a basketball player happened in New Orleans. You throw in all the other accomplishments during that time. He got an MVP trophy stolen from him, but that's neither here nor there. Shout out to Kobe. That jersey deserves to be retired, in my opinion. Now, to your other point in regards to Boogie and AD, I laughed thinking about that because before you even mention what they had to do to get to the playoffs, we got to remember what happened before Boogie even tears his Achilles. They had to rattle off like six straight, seven straight, something like that against like shaky teams.
It was a
And
shaky schedule in that
yes.
January.
So the funny part about that is people remember the Houston game just for him tearing his Achilles. But the reason that was so important because this is the game that mattered. Like, are you for real? You won all these games. You finally were able to get some level of consistency because they had been losing some games against teams they probably should have beat. They like it was a lot of shit they were trying to put together.
They were barely above
They were just okay. They were just okay. But the Houston game was where, all right, if y'all really working towards something, beat them. Houston had some weird record. They hadn't lost with Chris Paul and James Harden in the lineup or some shit. Like it was one of them. Chris Paul back in New Orleans, he always killed up, but all this other stuff. You weren't supposed to beat them. Couldn't guard James Harden. DeAndre Liggins out there guarding him like he arrested because he don't want to foul him. It was god awful. So that's how big that game was before the All-Star break. And then, you ultimately end up winning the game, so on and so forth. But we hadn't gotten to the point to where we were talking about what they could do into the in the playoffs. We knew that they were a matchup nightmare, but they had other pieces that they need. We were just trying to get past this game, get to the trade deadline, because we had already heard at that time about Mirotic possibly being someone that they will go after, and some of the upgrading of the small forward position, and some of maybe getting each one more out of the starting lineup, which makes the Nick Young thing funny. What the Boogie had on the on Gil's show, but that's what we were thinking about. They still had some other things to grow because they they were a problem. But say that we were a problem. They gave Golden State the blues for like 2 quarters in each game.
2 quarters.
Each game.
Each game. Remember, AD said they lost in 6. They lost in 5. Like, he don't even remember the series right. They lost in 5. And AD's like, well, we lost 6 games. No, bro. No, you did not.
So it's just one of those things. It's nice to remember, to remember it better. And the thought of the potential and the fact that they had something, once again, that was different. Circling all back to Zion, they had something that was completely different from everyone else. So that scares people. And the thought of that is crazy. Even the game, they played Golden State with Boogie twice that year. And it was a similar thing to where they lost, but there were periods in that game to where it was like they might beat them. They might beat Golden State. Golden State do both of the games, what they always did in the third quarter, wreck the entire game. Shit's over when you can't keep up. So we were just trying to get to the trade deadline, Grubb. Who are they going to add? Because the team still had weird fits. They still had Ian Clark, like the talent.
Solo.
Solo. We were starting to see the bad effects of Rondo and the fact that how that situation could end up hurt. They still needed depth in some other pieces before we could really lean into what they were going to be. You know what I'm saying? So we hadn't gotten there yet. So we were going to win the championship. We didn't know they're gonna make the playoffs. We were just hoping they could win a national televised game against Houston, bro. Like, get to the All-Star break.
It's like, come on. Like, it's a good story, but the reality, it's like, AD, come on, bro. And it's those two guys. I've never heard Drew say that. Have you ever heard Drew Holiday say, yeah, we should have won a title? He's never said. I never heard Rondo. And Rondo being one of the smartest, most articulate players when it comes to breaking down the game of basketball. Because if you were there, Rondo and Boogie, that was this all the time. And I think how much does it change for Rondo's emergence in that locker room when Boogie's not there for him to fight with? You know what I'm saying? Like he ain't got to worry about I got to make Boogie happy every night because as talented as Boogie was, and he was at one point leading the MVP conversation up until about December because the Pelicans just weren't winning enough games. Like I said, they're hanging around. You ain't gonna win an MVP when your team is 500.
Yep.
But Boogie was playing the best basketball of his life that season. But Rondo wasn't happy. Rondo was not happy that whole time because of the way things were going. You got happy Rondo the last 30 games of that season. And
They
that
got
is
the ball back.
And look, where no matter where you go, a happy Rondo, whether you saw it in Chicago, whether you saw it when unhappy Rondo, it is a big difference. And I don't know if you ever get happy. And I don't know what happens with Mirotic. If Mirotic shows up, is he playing 30 minutes a night if you've got Boogie and AD on the floor? He's not. So he's not shooting the ball like he did. He's not having the greatest. He's a piece. He's not a starter. You know what I'm saying? He's not what he was. So those types of things, it changes. You can't. I like to say. I wish we could have seen what we could have been. Fair. To say we could have won the title that year. Come on, no, we should have. We just could. We should have won
Grubb.
the title.
I mean, dog. They didn't have a wing defender. You know what I mean? So Solo
was the starting three.
Exactly. Like in the playoffs later on, they still didn't have a wing defender. So Drew is trying to guard Kevin Durant and doing the best that he can. You didn't have a wing defender. Everybody talk about Nico. In that lineup, Nico's your small forward. Teams are gonna eat. I don't care about Boogie and AD being your 4 and 5 and what that does in regards to possible rim protection. You are slow. You have essentially 3 power forwards on the floor, an older Rondo and Drew pretty much like in the come on. Like it's nice to think, but they had so many other. I mentioned the wing defender element because once again, what we talked about earlier, DeAndre Liggins had to play important minutes for this team because they didn't have enough wing defenders. Each-Wan Moore was just starting small forward. It's always always fun though.
Right? And I don't know if you get peak AD. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
Like the switch that AD turned on, does that ever happen if Boogie's still there dominating the conversation? You know what I'm saying? If Boogie's still there in the locker room saying, I'm not getting my shots tonight. Because that, no matter what you think, Boogie's going to do that. Win or lose, Boogie needs his shots. So if he's doing that every night, does AD feel empowered enough to become what he became over that second half of the season? Does he score 50 in the All-Star game if Boogie is there? All the things that boosted his confidence for him to ask out the next year, because his whole confidence to do that is built on that playoff run.
That's a good point.
And if that doesn't happen, and I don't know if that happens if Boogie is there. So AD's whole life, his whole career is very much different if Boogie is there, because maybe then the Pelicans have decided Boogie's the guy, and it's Boogie's team. And are we talking about AD the same way? If Boogie doesn't get hurt, are the Pelicans built around Boogie, and AD is 1A? I mean 1B, and Boogie's 1A. How does that vibe change then? You know, that stuff, like you can't just be throwing them things out like Anthony Davis doing. Like, hey, you in Dallas now, be Dallas, bro. And don't be doing this stuff talking about trying to hype New Orleans up after you walked out. You walked out. I don't need him to write no letters to the city and say how much you love, but don't be doing this. Don't do this to the people.
Nah, man. I just knew because I remember he said that last show on a podcast with D'Angelo Russell, and I'm like, what? You knew what? You knew y'all were gonna do what? And yes, great points, man. Like he turned into a different. We got a chance to see what Anthony Davis as a carrier looked like because he had to. Circling back to Zion. We saw a different side of AD that we never thought that we might. We got so used to him being complimentary and just fitting in and just standing around and letting others take charge that we didn't know he had what we saw later on in that season, where their longest winning streak, I think,
was 11
Yeah, I think
games.
that dates back to the longest winning streak. It was that period. It was that period and that season of Drew and AD, but it was clearly AD. We watched him become a dominant force, and it didn't matter who was on the floor. But he had to be forced to do it. He had to be challenged. He had to have his counterpart, his injured counterpart, ask for his Achilles. He will go out there and play with a stomach bug, whatever it was. AD had to grow a lot mentally and physically because they had no other choice, and it was all on him. There was no savior. There was no Tyreek. There was nothing but a Drew Holiday and a Rajon Rondo, and the roster in a lot of ways was bare. It was him. The floor was him, and you saw what happened. For better or for worse, that's what happened. Perfect segue to what we talked about this whole damn show. Same thing. And I'm hoping this is the same thing that's going to happen for better or for worse with Zion Williamson.
Chris, man, it's always a pleasure, dude. Please tell the people how they can keep up with you and what you got going.
Impatient Bull, man, as always on Twitter. I don't think my name's Impatient Bull on Instagram, but you'll find me when you see me, man. Doing shows pretty much quite at least weekly with my dog Lito. We just try to talk as much basketball as possible, try to come up with as many different and creative ideas to keep ourselves sharp and kind of ahead of the curve. And as always,
you did a breakdown, didn't you?
Yeah. On Carlos, just watching film and you never. I don't think I ever get to the point. He the same way, and I know you are as well. I never get to the point where I feel like I mastered anything. I always want to learn something new. I always want to see something new. I always if somebody want to correct me and tell me I'm wrong in debate, or teach me something, I'm all for it because I want to add more shit to my arsenal. I ain't no shame in me when it comes to that. So we continue to put our work, man. Getting better there, and then of course post game with the Propels Talk and Boo Crew Media. Pretty much there throughout the week as well. So that's pretty much it. But almost nothing beats being here with Grubb, just having a real good basketball, genuine conversation. With my brother. It's just always brings out spirit and just good talk, man. We've been here an hour and 30, and it never feels that way. So y'all continue to tap in with everything that Grubb is doing. One of the hardest working people, one of the best people. And my vote, the best person in Pelicans media right now. He's doing so much with Tulane, always trying to figure out different ways to add to his game, and that's what's special. So probably the most important and influential person that I've met in my time trying to work around this this media, this content world. If y'all do not know that y'all living with or y'all listening to somebody who is exceptional at what he does, it's David Grubb, man.
I'm gonna slide you that Cash App later for that. I appreciate you, brother. You ain't had to say all that, but I really do appreciate it. I never, you're my friend, and like I said, I'm proud of the way you've come up in this game and just the work that you put in. I know I got to be more consistent, but like I said, life intervenes the way it does, and what the circumstances have been. We talk offline regularly, and I communicate with you what's going on. But ultimately, I love the game of basketball. I love covering the game of basketball. I love talking about the game of basketball. So I try to make sure if I can't talk it on here, please check out the Bird Writes because I do write consistently every game about this team. So check it out. But for Chris Connor, I am David Grubb, and this has been the Bird Calls, and I will be back sooner rather than later. Y'all have a good one, and let's go Pels.